Welcome back to Microsoft Excel 365. We'll get started in about 10 minutes as people come on board. So just as a reminder, we will not be having class on Thursday. So we'll do a makeup class following next week. That way we can get everything in. And then tomorrow we'll start PowerPoint. Okay, let's get started. So up until now, we have been working with a lot of formulas, and those are very good things, but we've been doing them individually. Now we're going to branch out and have Excel do a whole bunch of work for us in what are called pivot tables. So pivot tables, they're pretty easy. They have a lot of components in them, or can have a lot of components depending on how your data works and what you're trying to show. However, it is a good chance to use things like the formulas we've had before, but also to come up with different conclusions. So what we're going to do is create a new Excel workbook, just like we always do. And then from today's email, you've got Excel 09 pivot tables. So if you select that, you should get our set of data. Something like this. So this is going to be for a pharmaceutical company, and it's their sales. And as you scroll down, you'll see they had a lot of sales. So we're going to go ahead and select from cell G85 all the way up to A1. And I'm going to use my keyboard, Control Shift Home. And there we go. Then we're going to copy that. Then we're going to switch over to our worksheet. And just paste it in like we normally do at A1. And I'm going to rename this Excel 09-pivot tables. Okay, I'm going to rename this sheet my data table. You call it anything you want. You call it pharmaceutical sales. Depending on what other sheets are in your workbook, I'm going to widen up my column so I can see everything, see what's been going on. Then we're set. So as I scroll down, I'm going to widen column B. You'll see basically what we're looking at is there's the region in which the pharmaceuticals were sold, the office they were sold out of, the month they were sold, the drug that was used, who the salesperson was, and total sales. All right. Now we could analyze this with our regular and usual formulas. So like right here at the bottom, I'm going to skip a line because I kind of want this data to stand alone. And here's another reason to skip a line for totals. If you do it where you skip a line, when you create the pivot table, it won't include these extra stats, which is what we don't want. It's because it'll actually redo them for us. So you'll see that in a minute. So I'm going to put down here on cell B87, pardon me, totals. And like I like to do, I'm going to make it bold. I'm going to make it 12 points. And the first thing I want to do is add up column G. So I'm going to change my tools to see the auto sum. And there it goes. It's going to go all the way to the top from G7 all the way down to G87. So we got $1 million, 1.1 million in sales. All right. So that's all of our sales together added up. Now we do have some other stats. As you know, we can count total number of sales. So I'll put that down below. that one bold. Make it 12 points, and I could use my format paintbrush if I wanted to. Just like that. And now I'm going to do the count. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to come up here to my sum formula, copy that, click on cell G88, and then in my formula bar, paste it. So I'm going to use Control V and just wipe out the word sum, put in count. So we're looking at 79 sales. Even though it ends up on row 85, there's 79. Why the difference? Well, we have to accommodate some spaces up here, the name, and this set of titles. While we're here, let's put in average number of sales. This time, rather than read formatting it, again, I'm going to do a quick shortcut. I'm going to copy the word totals, paste it in B89, and then just override it by saying average, but I have to spell it right, sale. This one, I'm going to cheat again. This time I'm going to borrow count and bring it below. Paste in the formula bar, take out the word count, and just type in average. Now, if you wanted to, you could certainly use the formula functions up here. Click average. Okay. What'll happen though is I will have to tell it the range, because now I have two numbers above it that I do not want to include and a gap. And so it's not going to guess and lasso. And so you'll see I have to select it or remember what the range is. So by copying the data from the above formulas, it saves me this little step. I'm just having to go and go all the way to the top and then close parentheses, G7 to G85. So that works. The other way to do it quickly is once you get the average function tied in there and you put in your parenthesis, I can click on G85 and then Control Shift up arrow. And let the up arrow scroll for me. So you can do it by keyboard too, or anything like that. But that's why I like to just borrow what I've done before, paste it in here. Plus I know, like in this case, it increased it to 86. Not a big deal, but be consistent. All right. So next thing we want to know is we want to break it down by city. So if you look in column C, we've got Boston, we've got Chicago, we've got Atlanta, we've got Dallas. All right, so the way we would normally do this is try to count those up. So here's what we're going to do is now on B91, I want to, again, take a little line break here. I'm going to put in total sales, or total number of Dallas sales. I'm going to do the same thing for Boston. So again, I'm going to copy from B91, paste it down here to B92, and just take out Dallas and put in Boston. Once again, copy, paste, take out Boston, and I think we have Atlanta and Chicago. All right. So once again, I'm going to take my formatting. This time, though, I don't want to make them bold because they're a little long. I mean, pardon, I don't want to increase their size, but I do want to make them bold. And I want to right align them on this cell, column B. And then I'm going to widen column A to make more room for the first part of the words. All right, so now we want to count how many Dallas sales happened. So now we're going to use another formula. It's called Countif. So it works the same or very similarly to count, but we're going to say only count it if the column above us has the word Dallas in it. So we're going to use equal sign, and then you can use the function bar if you like. You can scroll down and find Countif, and you'll see Countif has 2 elements to it. So this one's not too complicated. It's basically the range that you're going to analyze, and then you want to also select what it is, the criteria. So you'll see here, we've got Countif, range, and criteria. Oh, okay, easy enough. So it's a lot like count. That's the good news. And it's the same concept. So Countif, left parentheses, and I'm going to select all of my cities in column C. Now, again, if I wanted a shortcut, I could have looked at my sum and seen that it starts at row 7. So I could have just typed it in there. But it's C7 through C85. Remember, the colon means through. And you see we have one more thing to add. So we'll put a comma in. So what we're saying is, okay, Excel, count if the word is starting with Dallas, right? So Dallas. Since it's a word, I have to put it in quotes. I don't have to do the uppercase, lowercase, but it looks nicer if I do. Close parenthesis. Now what the computer is going to do is count how many times Dallas shows up here. Okay. Now I'll do the same thing for Boston. So again, I could swipe this formula, but just for practice, I'll do it again. Equal sign, count if, and then I need my range. Well, I'm just going to remember. I'm going to take out 84, C7 through C85. So I told you could just key it in manually, comma, and this time I want to look for Boston. Close parentheses. Remember, every open parenthesis needs a close parenthesis. There you go, 28 times. Now for Atlanta, I can borrow this Boston one, which is working, copy it, paste it here, and then take out Boston and just type in Atlanta. 16. See how that's working? So again, it's just looking at the spelling and figuring them out. And one more. So count if, left parentheses, C7 through C85, comma, Chicago. Done. All right. So that's what Countif does. If you want to count the number, so like in this case, let's see. Let's pick a good number out of here. So the sales are around 15,000, 20,000. Okay. So over here on F91, I want to say sales over $20,000. Let's make it $10,000. That seems to be a cutoff point. Okay, I'm going to red align it and bold it. And now I'm going to put in my Countif formula, equal sign, Countif, and then left parenthesis. And now we're looking at column G, right? So it's G7, because I memorized that from last time, down to G85, comma, and then I want to say greater than $10,000. Now, because this is not a word, it's a number, I don't need my quotes. I do need the greater than sign. Remember the alligator pointing to the greater number. My 10,000 is going to be the smaller number. 10. And I messed up something here. Something didn't work right. I got the right range. Well, in the desktop version, this is how you do it. So either I'm missing something, I'm just double checking everything, count if at range, and it should be greater than number. And then what it would do is count how many times are greater than number, but I'm getting an error here. So I'm going to remove that. But that's how count if is supposed to work. It will count the incidents in the column. Let's go down here. Let's do another one. Let's do for months. So I'm going to borrow total number of sales in Dallas. I'm going to move this one over here to cell C96. I'm going to take out Dallas and put in April. I've got April, May, and June, and I think I saw July. Nope. So April, May, and June. So this time, I'm going to paste them down as a group like this, and then just go through and change April to May, and then April to June. All right, at D96, I'm going to do my count if. And I'm going to select the range. Now I know it's D7 to D85, but I'll go ahead and lasso it. I'm just being sure because of my last experience. Yeah, that's what I want. Comma, April, in quotes, close, parentheses. 24. I want to do the same thing for May. Now just use a copy and paste. Paste. When I click on the word April, if I just double click, it'll select the entire word. I don't have to delete as I type the capital letter M, it replaces it. So that goes a little faster. For June, you notice I didn't have to go back and copy again. Even though I don't have the marching ants, when you copy in the formula bar, anything that's in the formula bar, it stays in the clipboard. So I just had to paste again. I could have copied again, didn't matter. But again, I'm trying to save a little timer. So I just hit paste. I knew it was in the clipboard and poof, there it is. And now we'll take out April, replace with June. All right. So you see here with all of our formulas here, we can do our own little analysis. And this works great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Just depends on what your goals are here. But you can also have the computer do a lot of what we did all in one shot using what's called a pivot table. To see the pivot tables, we're going to have to go to Insert. And if I use the drop-down list, you'll see one of the categories is pivot table. So the reason they call it a pivot table is it can look at a lot of things simultaneously. Meaning down here at our bottom statistics, okay, we've got the total sales, we've got an average sale, and we know, Dallas, Boston, April, May, June. But here's what it's hard to tell. From this, how many Dallas sales occurred in April? How many Dallas sales occurred in May? How many Dallas sales occurred in June? What we didn't do is figure out our salespeople too. How many sales were made by Pat Greer in May? All right, these stats work great, but they're kind of two-dimensional. So a pivot table lets you do them all at once and come up with different answers. So here's how we're going to do it. To do a pivot table, you always start at your top set of data. Oh, by the way, I think I mentioned this before, but one thing that's critical for a pivot table to work, spelling. So you'll see all my northerns are spelled correctly. Boston's all spelled correctly. April's spelled correctly. If somebody makes a typo, like in northern, let's say they forget the E, okay, we as humans, we would know, oh, that was northern, they just messed up. The computer doesn't. It'll think that's its own region. So this will all be its own little region unto itself. Same with any salesperson, the name of the drug, the name of the month, and the office. All of them have to have exact spelling because the computer is very literal about that kind of stuff. So, and again, there are ways to limit what people can enter in here, and you can give them a choice: Boston, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, and only allow them to choose from that, and then the spelling is always correct. The other way to do it is you can always check things just by doing a sort. So you'll notice these are all sorted by the region first. So as I skim down, you'll see northern and southern. If there is one, let's say it's southern, I forgot the O. If you're skimming down, see the little southern stands out, and it's almost like a little animation that stands out because it's shorter. That's one way to eyeball it. Now we only have, was it 79 items? You could have 790 items. This could be a very long list. Hopefully everybody's typed in everything correctly. So in our case, it is. Hooray. So how we're going to do the pivot table. Start off with B7. So you do it right under the labels, because the computer is going to assume that every column has a label for a pivot table. So whatever's above it must be the name, right? So that's why we're starting with the data. And then the data does have to be contiguous, meaning there can't be any breaks. Like here, if I inserted this, that would mess up our pivot table. It would only go down to this point, include this data all the way up. So it has to be contiguous. But what it's going to do, it's going to start here. And then when we insert the pivot table, it's going to run down and over and select this set of data. Like that. So again, you can't have empty columns in here. If you do, you have to hide them. So any breaks in the columns will mess up your pivot tables too. So none of that. All right, so B7, I'm going to select the pivot table tool. And here we go. So it says create pivot table. So what it did, it automatically selected the range. Now, as I told you before, sometimes it gets it wrong. So if this is not the correct range, you can adjust it manually here, but you'll see it's B6 to G85. Well, given the statistics we just did, well, I know that's correct. So I can even scroll down and see it, and I can see the marching ants going around it. So perfect. Okay. The next thing we have to decide here is, where do we want the pivot table to show up? In this case, I want it to show up in the existing worksheet. You'll see the options here. You could choose a new worksheet, and that's what it would do. It create a new worksheet down below. Depending on your goals, you could do that. And we'll do that later, but to get started, we want to keep it here just because we can see how it uses our data. So it's going to be in the existing worksheet, and the location I want it is right next to my data table. So I'm going to make it I6. So I'm going to type in I6. Then I'm going to click OK. Okay, I don't know if you could, let me scroll over a bit. You can see behind the scenes, it's dropped a pivot table in, but it's empty. So that's fine now, because we're going to tell it what goes in that pivot table. And the way we tell it is it brings up a new little menu to choose from. And what it did, it captured all of our titles. So you see region, office, month, drug, salesperson, and even the total sale. So You can set up filters for this. Remember how we did our filters? And that would limit your pivot table if you just wanted to show a region, for example. But what we want to show is the office. So I'm going to turn the office. And you'll see as I select it on the left-hand side, it's starting to build my table for me. That's good. And then I want to do the salesperson. I'm going to do the total sales. You'll notice when I select total sales, because it's a number, it automatically popped down here in the value of sales. Okay. So that's good. That's our pivot table at work. And right now I've got 2 rows. So if I click here, you'll see there's office and then there's salesperson. I'm going to close this window temporarily so I can see more of what I'm doing and see what it did for me. Ta-da. All right, so here's the office. We got Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas. Here's the salesperson. And it does their sum of their total sales down here under each of the offices. The one thing it doesn't do, I don't know why, is it doesn't inherit the formatting. So you'll see our numbers are not currency or even accounting. So I am going to switch that. So I'm going to select them. I did include the title, sum of total sale. That's okay, because it's a word, it's not going to be affected. Go back to home and then change it to accounting. Okay. You'll see next to each city or each office name, we do have a little minus button. So this is an active table, meaning I could click that and it condenses down Atlanta, Boston, and I'm only going to look at Chicago, so I'm going to also close Dallas. So it includes their total, but only shows their salespeople. I can turn them back on. So if I printed it now, for example, it would only show the Chicago people and the Dallas people. And Boston and Atlanta, that shows their totals, but not the people. All right. So how do I know it combined like Sue Cooper's total? Well, one thing I can do is take a look right here. And I see in my pivot table, here's Sue Cooper. She made 124,000 something in sales. Well, here she is over here. And I can see in May, well, I crossed her out, but it's not only 19. So that's what it did. It did a subtotal for each of those. So see how it moved the data around? And then we have still our grand total. And there you go. So that'll give you a breakdown of your salespeople. This is similar to what we did down here, except you'll notice that when we did our sales, we did it by city and we didn't do it by salesperson. So we could set up one for every sales name in here and do a count. You could also convert this into a VLOOKUP, which is fine too, except this way it's so much easier. It does it in one shot. And then you do have a lot of controls on the pivot table while it's still here. So you'll notice we've got a couple of drop-down arrows next to office and salesperson. So what we're looking at, if you recall from when we did filters, is basically the sort. So if I look, the office goes alphabetical, A, B, C, D. I can use my drop-down list here, and I can change the filter to sort descending. So that throws them in reverse order. I could do the same thing for salespeople. Sort descending. You can also sort them by value. So I clicked on the value. And we're going to do by the sum of total sale. Sometimes if we had, let's say we had their commissions in here too, as a number, that would be another option. So you would have sometimes a couple of different options to do it from, to value from. And we'll switch it to largest to smallest. And you'll see it resorted them by the sum of the total sale, largest first. See how that pivot table worked? And it's just that easy. Then, of course, once you click on the pivot table, you will notice at the top ribbon, you have a new menu for pivot tables. What that means is you have pivot table tools, but you only see it when you're clicked on the pivot table. So if you're over here in the data, and I say, okay, now I want to change my pivot table. Hey, wait, where did my tool go? It's because you have to be somewhere in the pivot table in order for it to show up. So here are the controls. Right now we're using a blue layout. I use my picked list. You can customize this in the desktop version, make it any style you like, or here they have the customized styles, and we're using the blue medium, but let's say you want to go red, well, orange. So there we go. So you can make them distinct that way. I think it always defaults to blue. You'll see at the top up here, we have the options to turn on the fields that we selected, but also the plus and minus buttons. So you're able to turn those off if you don't want to. So now I turned them off. You'll notice here with the city names, I no longer can shrink them down. So if you're doing a report that you're going to share, again, you don't want people doing that to you, you can turn that off unless they know how to turn them back on. They can't do it. But I can turn it back on and it gives everybody the option. Does that make sense? Okay, let's take a look at field list again. So if I click on field list, it brings up my controls here. And that's where we started. So if we wanted to change something, if we wanted to add something, we can do it here. You also have this option for settings. So if you click on settings, you'll see it gives you some settings like we did with the charts. Okay, so pivot table 1 is going to be, we're going to rename this sales by office and salesperson. You'll see we have the grand totals in the rows and the columns, and we only have the one grand total at the bottom, so that's not a big deal. But if you had a lot of them, you want to turn them off, you can. You can ask it to show us the subtotals like we have here. Right now, they're at the bottom. You can switch them so they show up at the top. Just depends on your needs. You can also change the layout. You can also change how it handles errors. So you'll see if there's an error, you can have it show data is incomplete. We don't have any errors. But let's say that there was some kind of number, like even like our totals here at a calculation error, say that it was commission and it was percentage and somebody had divided by 0 because they didn't enter in the commission yet, it would get the error. Instead of showing the error, it would say data is incomplete. And then if there's any empty cells, you could say, data is incomplete again if there's somebody forgot to put something in. So you do have these options. Our case, it's really not going to matter. Over here on the right-hand side, you can always switch back and forth between the two sets of controls. That's the field list and the settings. So I click back here, there's a field list we started with and the settings. Okay. If you need to move the pivot table, it can mess up the copy and paste. So what you can do then is, rather than copy and paste it, they have this move pivot table option. And here is where we started. And it tells us the tab name, so the worksheet, it's called data table. And then I6, but of course it put in the absolutes. But remember, I just typed in I6. You can also move it to its own new worksheet. But we're going to leave this as it is because that's our first one. And I'm going to close my fields here. All right, so that's our first pivot table. That's basically how they work. Any questions on that? Let's try another one. This time, though, we're going to kind of modify the display. So we're not going to change the numbers or what numbers are shown, but we are going to modify the display. So for a new pivot table, again, I want to click on B7. That's the first entry of my data. I'm going to go to the Insert ribbon and Pivot Table. I want it to be the existing worksheet. And this time, I'm going to put it right next to the pivot table. So I'm going to say M6, location M6. And if you want, you could type the $M, $6. I figure let the computer do some work. It can put those in there for itself. M6. Okay. All right, so now it plants a blank pivot table. We're going to use the same information. So we're going to go office, salesperson, total sale. You'll notice we get a duplicate of what we just had. But this time I'm going to go over here to where it says rows. So you'll see the rows. And if I scroll down a little bit, I'll see there's office and salesperson. So what we did last time is we just made these as two separate rows. And you can see there's a row for office, Atlanta, and then one row for each salesperson. I'm going to change salesperson. So under where it says rows, I'm going to click on this little triangle or the arrow pointing down. It should be on the right-hand side. And sometimes it's a little sneaky. There it is. So when I click on it, I get a little list to choose from. If I want to get rid of it, I can remove the field. I'm going to move it to columns. So this time the salesperson is going to be in columns. Okay. Everything else is going to be exactly the same. And I'm going to close this toolbar and look what it did. So it took the salespeople and gave each salesperson a column going across. Right? Again, I told you it likes blue. So it turned all blue. But it's the same data, but look at the difference in what we've got. Now we do have the same problem as before. Again, I still have no idea why, because it would be so simple to do, you'd think, that we need to change the numbers into currency or accounting. So I'm going to go to Home. First, select the numbers, go to my Home ribbon, change to Accounting. And then here's the thing with the data table. The data table automatically widens the columns if they're not wide enough. So you'll notice my grand totals were not wide enough, but they did jump over. Now, with this control, with this data table, you have the same controls. So I'm going to click on Office, and I can change it sort descending. So now it's Dallas, Chicago, Boston, Atlanta. It's the same as before, and same with the salespeople. So I'm going to sort by value. I'll go largest to smallest by their total sum of sale. And there you go. Immediately I can tell who's the best salesperson, Joe Brown. Who's followed right behind, Sue Cooper. Who needs to light a little fire? Oh, Mark Green needs a little boost to his morale or something so he can get out there and do more sales. So see, just like that, I can tell you who the best salesperson is. Now remember, before we could do max and min and things like that. This way it's all done for you. So it's a little faster. And once you get used to these, it can be done very quickly. And then once you have your pivot table in here, if you're, let's say you're giving a presentation before the board of directors, you can sort pretty quickly here. And then if you don't want to do that, you can sort just alphabetically this way. And there we go. Now, just as a reminder, I sorted alphabetically from descending to ascending, meaning the last letter of the alphabet to the first. Instead of A to Z, it's Z to A. We say, well, wait a minute, Cooper, that's a C, that should be at the end. Well, that's not what it's going by, because again, the computer is very literal, and it's taking the name with the first name first. S as in Sue, then Sally, then P, and you can see all the way up. So once again, looking at this data table, in the salespeople, the computer is just looking at the first letter and doesn't know if it's a name, place, or a brand name. It doesn't matter to the computer. It's just a letter in the alphabet. So when it sorts, it's going to sort by that letter. The other way to fix that is in your data table, a lot of times you'll have, instead of Joe Brown, it'll be Brown, comma, Joe. I did all caps. Like that. And then you get them to show up that way. Now, I just changed it so that Joe Brown lost some money. But look at my pivot table. I don't see Brown, comma, Joe. What happened? I have to go up to my pivot table. You'll see you have this button, refresh all. You do have a list to choose from. If you just want to refresh this table, you can, depending on your computer speed. If you have a lot of pivot tables, you could take a second or two to refresh all. I'll just hit refresh. And you'll notice, since I did in capital letters, it really stands out. It did the update. So the one thing to keep in mind is when you're using pivot tables, you do have to refresh it. There's Brown, comma, Joe. Okay. So I'm going to go and undo that, change it back. To make sure I spell it right, I'm going to copy a Joe Brown that's spelled correctly, paste it here into salesperson. But see, once again, it hasn't been updated. So I have to go back to my pivot table and I tell it, let's do refresh all. And I don't know if you can't see it on mine, but it also refreshed the orange one and the blue one. So everything got refreshed. And now Brown, comma, Joe is back under Joe, comma, Brown, or Joe Brown. So that's the basics of a pivot table. Any questions on that? If you wanted to, you can use this table and you could still do the math on it and some of the functions. So, like we have the Countif or the sum. Now it automatically has a sum, so you probably don't need that. And if you wanted to put in subtotals for each of the cities, if you remember, we did have the control to turn that on. So that's probably easier. But, again, if you want to say the average of sales, what was the average of all these sales? You could do it here, left parenthesis. The only thing is you can't use the subtotals. So you have to do the non-contiguous sales or non-contiguous cells. So if you're going to do it that way. All right, if there's no questions, it's 6:55 in the evening, so we'll take a 10-minute break, come back at 7:05, and then we're going to do a little more advanced pivot table with our data. And here's the thing with pivot tables. As we only did the office and the salesperson, the total sales. You could do it by drug, you could do it by the region, and a lot of different analysis. So that's the cool thing about pivot tables, is they let you see things, all this data in different ways. So we'll be back at 7:05, and we'll finish up our pivot tables. Okay, we are back. So when I was messing around, somebody pointed out that I changed all my regions to northern. Now, it didn't make any difference because I didn't use that in my pivot table, but it could, and it might in the future here. So thanks, and I just updated it. All I did is just go back to my original data source, recopied and pasted. All right, so you remember one of the options we had was to change, or when we inserted the pivot table, to insert it onto a new tab, basically a new worksheet. So that's what we're gonna do next. And then we're gonna make it a little bit more advanced. So we're gonna include some more of the data into it. The only difference between the two is basically where it sits. If you wanted to design one, you could design it on the current sheet. And then when you move, or when you get it all exactly the way you want it, move it over into its own worksheet. So that's sometimes helpful because you can refer immediately to the data next to it. However, sometimes these can get quite large and they don't always fit very easily. So that can be a problem too, and then you just kind of have to struggle through it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new pivot table. And I'm going to start in the same spot. So it's going to be on B7. I'm going to insert pivot table. So again, it selected the range, so that's right. And remember when we started, I put in all my formulas and I intentionally left a gap. That way it wouldn't try to include those in there. So that's one of the reasons to leave a gap. But I'm going to say a new worksheet and click OK. So you'll see below what it did is it created the new worksheet. It just gave it the name sheet 1. So we'll change that in a second. And then it put the pivot table, it put it at A3. It didn't put it at A1. So that's just one of the things it does. It leaves room in case where you want to put extra titles in or something. So it's an option. And then as before, you can always move it or you can delete those rows. And then if you delete rows 1 and 2, then of course, obviously the pivot table becomes starting at row 1. So that's an option too. So, you know, there's lots of things you can do with this. Whatever the computer defaults to, you know, it's fine, but just adjust it later as you go along. Okay, so now we're going to tell it which cells we want to use. And to do so, we are going to change the columns and the rows. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select from our list, we're going to do office as a row. So I'm going to turn the check mark on here for office. Yep, there it comes. Then I also want to drag or to use the month. So I'm going to turn that one on. So you see how it's building. It's giving us the office and the month. We're going to do the total sales, and that's automatically going to go down to the values. And then we're also going to use the drug. So this is going to be a little bit more complex. There we go. But this time we're going to leave the salesperson out of it. So this won't include the sales data. This is just going to be the office, the drug, the month, and the total sales. If we were doing this on the desktop version, you actually could set up pages. And what I mean by that is it would generate a data table for each of the different categories, say, for example, the 2 different regions. So we don't have that in the 365 online. You can do that. You can do it manually just by creating one and then copying like northern. Say we did the northern one, copy it, paste it, and then call it southern, and then reset it to southern. Okay, one thing we're going to do here is I'm going to find my rows, and I'm going to go to month and click on month. So right here, just so I could see month. I don't know why they made it so small, but they did. So I kind of fiddle with it a bit. And I'm going to click on that drop-down triangle, and I move this to columns. All right. So this gives me a breakdown of the drugs, the months, and all the sales that occurred in each of the areas that we set up. Now, if I wanted to, I could move like drugs into columns as well. What it does, you'll see it resorts that and gives us the breakdown this way. So it really depends on what do you want the viewers to see? What's most important? It does make a difference on how they are listed. So you'll see under columns, we had 2 items. So we had month, and then we have drug. Well, you'll see on the table here, that's basically what it's doing, month to drug. So it goes first by month, then by the drug. If you want to do it the other way, you can. You can also, once you have something in the columns, move it back, like I'm going to click on drug and use that little drop-down triangle and move to rows. Like that. So now what it did, it used the month in the columns. So you see there's April, May, June. But then the drug now is over in one column, basically the numbers are in the rows. So see how that works? I'm going to go back and put drug over here to columns. So it does make a difference on the order in which you click. If I include region now, watch what happens. It breaks it up to too many rows. So you got Atlanta Northern, Atlanta total, Boston like that, in this way. So I'm going to turn off the region. If you wanted, now you'll notice we have all the cities listed. If you wanted to limit it, here's what we can do. Click on the region, click on region here. And you'll see there's move to filters. That gives us a new box at the top. And you'll see it appear right here at A1. So it's a good thing I left some room because there we go. Now, if I click here, I can look at my northern region or my southern region. Okay, while we're here on the pivot table. I'm going to refresh all. There it is. Remember I told you I made a mistake and I accidentally copied the word northern over all my southerns. So when I went here to my region, I only saw northern, but now I can see them both. Okay, you can leave this toolbox here open. It doesn't hurt anything. I think kind of a distraction. Plus, you can't see the whole table when it's on. All right, so now we have a little bit more complex calculations here, or layouts. Again, I'm going to select all my numbers. I'm going to go back to home. I'm going to make those accounting. So once again, stretch it out. And then the sheet name, I'm going to change from sheet 1 by double clicking on it. And we'll call it full pivot table. So now that I included that filter category at the top here, I've got the region. Right now it's showing all. So let's say I only wanted to see the northern region. I'm going to turn on southern, or turn off southern, and leave northern checked. Click OK. See how it refreshed? And then I can go back, turn off northern, and just look at southern. And it refreshes that way. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to turn on the northern again. So this is automatically set to all. If I go to my pivot table menu, you'll see I have, again, I can change my colors. I think I'm going to do it into a grayish color, like this one. So this is light gray pivot style, medium 11. So this is everybody together. I did it gray because now I've got the full pivot table with everybody. I'm going to copy it and paste it. So I selected the whole pivot table, copied and pasted, but this time I pasted it here just to see how it pastes. So I'm going to undo that. So you had a choice. What I want to do is create 2 new tabs, basically 2 more worksheets. And this one's going to be the northern offices. And then 1 more worksheet, southern offices. Okay, starting at A3, I'm going to paste. There's my pivot table. Now, because I pasted it in, it didn't do the automatic widening of the column, so I still have to do that myself. There we go. But it did carry over the dollar amounts. I'm going to change this region here to show the southern only. So I'm going to turn off northern and click OK. Then, because it is supposed to stand out and look different, I'm going to go back to my pivot table ribbon. And this one, I'm going to turn it into a dark brown, pivot style dark 17. There we go. I want to do the same thing for the northern offices. Now, I still have it in my clipboard. See, it's still got the marching ants around here. So again, I'm going to do it to A3 in case I want to put titles at the top. Paste. To make it automatically widen, I'm going to select all my columns, A through N, double click in the little line between the 2. There we go. I have to click in the pivot table, go up to my pivot table tools ribbon. This one, I'm going to drop down and change colors to dark blue, pivot style, dark 16. This one I'm going to change to only be the northern office. So I'm going to turn off southern. So you'll notice when I do that, I now have a little filter up here. So it's telling me there is a filter and it can be changed. The reason that's significant is in the desktop version, there's an option when you're creating a pivot table is to create a new tab for every item in the list, every distinct item. So in this case, it would automatically create these northern and southern offices tabs down here in one shot. Well, we just did it manually, what it would do normally. The other way to do this is if we were doing a pivot table based on our salespeople. We had quite a number of salespeople. Each of the salespeople would get their own worksheet. When you look at those pivot tables, though, you would not see this control up here because they're limited to each person's name, or in this case, each region, and you can't filter it here. If you want to see the southern region, you can't do it from the northern workbook or worksheet. You'd have to go to the southern worksheet, and there it is. So just know that's one of the differences between the two. This is used quite often when you have a lot of long list of data, kind of like we saw yesterday with the VLOOKUP. And we could actually do a pivot table off of our prices. For example, if we want to know, which of the prices we had corresponds to their weights. Because I think we had something that was $1,000 and it only weighed 2 pounds. So you could do that. You could actually do an analysis. All right, what is our value of our products to our weights? Just, is it true the heavier ones are worth more? And in that case, you'd see, no, they're not quite. So in cell A1, I'm going to say Southern Region Pharmaceutical Sales. Okay. I'm going to select A1 over to G1, and I want to merge and center. So that's going to give me my title. I want to make this font larger. But before I do, I want to pick up my theme colors. So I'm clicking on the word region. And you'll see that I still have my format paintbrush available. So even though I'm creating my own title, and the computer did the shading for me, I am going to select that word region and click on A1 and get the Southern Region Pharmaceutical Sales. Now I want to enlarge it to like 24 points. See, that works. So just because it's a table or a pivot table doesn't mean you can't use it like a lot of other cells. So that's true of the format paintbrush. I'm going to click off of it. Yeah, very nice. Now, as you can imagine, I want to do the same thing with the northern offices. So, northern. Offices, pharmaceutical sales. I'm going to select A1 to G1, merge and center. I'll click on the word region or my paintbrush and click on the cells I just changed. And again, increase it, the size to 24 points, 26, oops. There we go, 24. See how that works? Now, our title up here is independent of the pivot table, meaning because I decided to give it a separate title, if I go into my pivot table chart here, and I want to move the pivot table, and I create new worksheet, watch what happens. I get sheet 1 down below, but my title didn't come over. See, it's gone, but left the title behind. So that's one of the reasons that if you can, put the titles within the pivot table if you plan on moving it. For the most part though, like in my experience, once you get it set, you really don't move it. In fact, let's see, I'd say at least 80% of the time, if we use a pivot table, it gets its own tab. Just because, there's other things you might want to work with it. And it just seems clearer if you have it set up as its own tab. So see the differences? And you could set one up if you want to do it manually for each drug. You could set one up for each of our salespeople here. You could set up for each month. And you could just do it based on sales. I mean, we've used sales each time as its you'll notice, like even in our first ones, show the field list, we took the total sales and made that the values. So you don't have to. I mean, you can analyze those if the numbers are more important than their totals. So you can set that up too. So that's the way pivot tables work. They work best when you have a lot of information you want to analyze. So in the long run, this is pretty much what we would probably set up for this. Got the full pivot table, so when it opens, that's the first worksheet. If you're in the know, you can change it to sort the months around and what you're going to view. But if you just have somebody who's not familiar with pivot tables, they can clearly see if I click here, I'm going to get my northern offices, here are the southern offices, and then it works better that way. So usually when you're doing a pivot table, you can set them up so they each have their own tabs. In the desktop version, it'll update the tabs if you update the data. It'll do that here too, but you still have to set them up first manually. But once you have them set up, you have that refresh button from any pivot table. In fact, now that we have a few of them, let's see how long it takes to refresh all. Nope, that was pretty fast. So what it'll do is it'll give you a little hourglass while it's waiting to make sure everything gets refreshed. You could also take what we did yesterday. So let's, we had how many offices here? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Let's say we had one for every major city in each state. So 52, that would be a lot. And we want to extract just say Dallas's Blueados, is that what it's called here? Medications. We could do a VLOOKUP, and this works as a table, just like we did yesterday, that data table. So you can do that as well, and it will give you the subtotal for Dallas. The difference between using a pivot table as your data source as opposed to the original data table is when we go down here to Dallas, we don't have subtotals. These are not added up together. So if we wanted to get the total for Dallas, it'd be a lot harder. So if you do a VLOOKUP on your pivot table, that works pretty well. Then you're really fancy. All right, well, if there's no other questions on pivot tables, we're done early. Everything went too easily. Sometimes with pivot tables, they do get a little dicey. Only in that it's basically deciding when you're working with the pivot table, which goes where. So when we're looking here at our field list, which do you want to be columns and which do you want to be rows? When I'm doing a pivot table, I don't even think about it ahead of time. I should, but I find I start thinking about the columns, and then because there's 2 factors potentially in each column, I figure, what I'm going to do? I'm just going to open the pivot tables and start playing with it. If I mess around, I'll find the layout that I like. And it's basically selecting what you want in the rows and then moving the rows to the columns. That's the big thing. All right. So we are done for the evening. This will wrap up Excel for us. So we're done with Microsoft Excel, and tomorrow we're going to start working with PowerPoint. That's kind of fun. And that'll be the presentations. We're still going to come back to Excel and Word. So what we're going to do in PowerPoint is use all three programs together. That's how fancy we're going to get. Oh, and one more thing, I almost forgot. So here, let's say I had our April totals. You can also run charts off of these too. So we could select April totals and the offices and do a pie chart, for example. So these work just like the regular tables. You just have these extra controls, and you have all these tools up here that allow you to make changes to the table itself. All right, so we're done for the evening. Hope you like pivot tables. It's one of those things that if you learn it, it's great. You might not use it for a while, but someday down the road, you might just say, you know, I think this would be one of those pivot table experiences. Pull up your exercise here, Excel 09 pivot tables, remind yourself how you did it, and go to it. It really becomes a good way to display a lot of data in a reasonable and manageable form. So have a good night, and we'll be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock. If you join the class late, I'll send this out tomorrow. And if you have any questions on the pivot tables, let me know. Drop me an email or a text, and I can help you along with it.